Great Recession, and we were not ready. I was not ready. I mean, we were like, what's going on? I remember I would always tell a joke about how my boss and I, we would joke at work. So how much did you lose today from your 401k? Oh, me, I lost a 10 grand. I lost 20. And that, that was our joke because it was going one direction and that was down. And I mean, it was strange just to be in that situation and not know what's going to happen, And, we didn't panic, but we definitely were like, wow. Because we weren't around for the Great Depression. We weren't around for any of that. The older people, they know that stuff. We were living in the good times. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we were balling, and then things changed. And it changed us when that happened. It changed us, our generation. Because we got to see our generation's recession. And it changed how we looked at life, how we looked at our jobs, how we looked at our money. Everything changed because for the first time we were like, wow, this could happen. I could wake up in the morning and the whole world could start going down. And then wake up the next morning and it keeps going down and be like, oh, well, that's just 2 days. The third day keeps going down. Man, that's just a week. That's just a month. That's just, oh my goodness, when is this going to stop? Oops. You know what I'm saying? It was a situation. And we thank God for wisdom. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the recession.
Have you on, as always. You really rattled some people with your latest note. It's always provocative, but this one particularly so. Your first line, quote, I have come to realize that the markets are potentially on a collision course for disaster. What did you mean by that?
Well, Brian, first off, I appreciate you acknowledging my literary skills. But the reality is that monetary policy and fiscal policy are both heading in directions which are contradictory to each other. The expansion now is getting into the late stages. Fiscal policy under the Trump tax cuts is highly stimulative, and that's pushing the economy to grow and to expand at a faster pace. Just at the same time that we're running out of workers and wages and prices are starting to feel upward pressure. So that, on the other hand, leads the Federal Reserve, whose mandate is full employment and stable prices, to have to say, hey, we really need to pick up the pace of monetary tightening. And in the process, we're going to push interest rates higher and we're going to make credit more restrictive. And once the first stimulative boost from the tax cut starts to dissipate around 2019, all of a sudden corporations are going to be facing higher interest costs, and the increased growth in cash flow is going to subside because the tax cut deal, though it's permanent, the growth free cash flow is a one-shot deal. And with record levels of corporate debt, they're going to find it very difficult to service this debt in a higher rate environment.
2019 sounds so far away, and then you realize, wait a minute, that's just next year. But can't corporations do, A, Scott, what they've always done, and B, what American households do? Refinance.
Well, except the problem here, Brian, is they're going to refinance at higher rates. And even though this tax cut is freeing up a lot of cash, over 40% of corporations surveyed say that their intention is to use this free cash flow to repurchase stock. Another 40% are talking about using it for increased M&A activity. 10% is being given back to the employees, and 10% is basically going out the door in the form of dividends. So there isn't going to be a cash windfall that sits on the balance sheet of the corporations. They're going to end up using it all, and as interest rates keep ratcheting higher with record levels of corporate debt, it's going to be harder and harder to service. And at some point, as the economy starts to mature and cash flows begin to stabilize and decline, it's going to be difficult for everybody to pay all this interest.
Are you suggesting a wave of defaults?
Oh, absolutely. I think that with corporate debt at these kinds of levels, our internal research shows that once you get short-term rates up around 3%, that we will be absorbing enough free cash flow that the free cash flow on corporate income statements will fall to a level which is consistent with levels that we've seen in prior recessions.
So are you calling for a recession in 2019?
Either late 2019 or more likely in the first quarter of 2020. And of course, with all this debt on the balance sheets, as we saw in the last crisis, Brian, the household sector was over-levered. In this cycle, the corporate sector is over-leveled, and so the defaults are going to be concentrated in corporate America, where in the past downturn they were basically focused in areas of consumer activity.
Does that mean that equities would also fall, or can equities and corporate bonds go in opposite directions? They don't normally, but could they?
Well, look, I think for the next year, even with the current tariff tantrum that we're in, that equities will probably continue to go up as we have all these stock buybacks and increased free cash flow. But ultimately, when the chickens come home to roost and we have a recession, we're going to see a lot of pressure on equities, especially as defaults rise. And I think once we reach a peak that we'll probably see a 40% retracement in equities.
Your thesis is about the Federal Reserve raising rates. Is there anything, though, in what you call the tariff tantrum that might suggest that if indeed we start to see some kind of a increased trade fight or even an all-out trade war, because right now everything is just proposed, if we see that, could the Fed slow its pace of rate hikes and maybe dial back some of the more dire predictions?
Well, look, that is absolutely a possibility. When you remember that the Fed was raising rates in 1987 and then was confronted with a stock market crash, that it quickly reversed course and cut rates. Or you look at 1997 when the Fed was raising rates and then we had a crisis in Asia and it reversed course. Obviously, these exogenous events can come in and basically do a reset. But ultimately, Brian, all that will do is defer the problem further into the future and allow excesses to continue to build. And the collision course that we're on will just come later, and it'll probably be worse.
But, listen, you yourself know the Fed could surprise. I mean, you and I spoke a decade ago, and you suggested to me and others that the Fed could actually buy debt directly, and sort of people laughed at you in a way, but that's exactly what ended up happening. The Fed is not the Fed of old, is it not? They have the power to surprise and do things that we don't expect anymore.
Well, that's true, but when you consider what their dual mandate is, that is, to maintain stable prices and to maintain full employment, they have shown that they will not deviate from that mandate unless faced with crisis. And so my belief ultimately, Brian, is that when faced with the moment of crisis, the reaction time for the Fed will be much faster this time around. But ultimately, if it is going to be as bad as I think it will be, we'll be right back into buying bonds onto the balance sheet of the Fed. And, QE will probably be in the trillions of dollars.
I'm starting to see ads for no money down mortgages, Scott. I read an article in the USA Today about how people are now buying homes sight unseen, about how people are buying homes that are, 7 and 8 times their annual income. And I'm wondering if we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of 10 years ago. What the consumer does is one thing, but do you think that the financial markets and the banks are stronger and smarter than they were a decade ago?
Well, I think certainly with the increased regulation and the enhanced capital, the financial institutions are a lot sounder. Also, Brian, when you look at the affordability numbers on homes, that is the relative income to the cost of paying the mortgage, homes are a lot more affordable than they were even 20 years ago. So I don't think we're going to see the crisis really spread into that sector in a major way. But where I do see risk is in things like commercial real estate. When you look at the skyline of Los Angeles or New York or any city that I visit, you just see cranes everywhere. And there are certain sectors like multifamily housing where the overbuilding has been extreme. And interestingly enough, just like in the prior crisis where homes were, basically being subsidized by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac with cheap government financing, Today, commercial mortgages on multifamily housing is being subsidized by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So, the overbuilding and the excesses which are starting to appear in real estate will probably be the second order effect to the recession I see coming. The first order effect will be actual corporations which will lay people off, will default on their debt, and then the second wave will be in declines in real estate values for commercial properties.
Sounds like the good times are going to be coming to an end at some point here soon. Scott Minerd, Global Chief Investment Officer of Guggenheim Partners. As always, thank you.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay.
All right, good. So we're going to have a little chat today about the economy and what's coming. Before we got into that video, we started off by talking about 2008, 2007, how it caught us all unawares. Everybody was just having a good time. 2006 was party time. My brother worked on Wall Street for Goldman Sachs, and 2006, the bonuses were ridiculous. It was the best year ever. He was like a junior level analyst, and I'm talking, they were getting tens of thousands of dollars bonus at junior level. That was a record year. The CEO that year got like a $20-something million bonus. So that was the range. The guys at the bottom were getting tens of thousands. CEO was getting millions. It was ridiculous. And then it was a year or two later, his office was across the street from Lehman Brothers. And Lehman Brothers was the investment firm that crashed and had to lay everybody off. And they sat, well, they didn't sit. They stood against the glass. Because, of course, obviously, it's fancy high-rise, watching grown, educated, multiple six-figure making guys walking out with boxes, streaming out of a fancy glass-covered building that signaled something's wrong right now. And it began. That's when it started. So they were able to see it. We just got big bonuses, and now here are our friends. Here's the guys we have lunch with, the guys we have sushi with, coming down the stairs, streaming out. They said they had to have the cops with caution tape around the building to allow the workers to leave, because there were so many of them, and they needed to give them room because spectators, because crowds were gathering, everybody just watching. So for us, it was, it was the news. Hey, Lehman Brothers just laid blah, blah, blah off. For them, it was real. And we cannot let this happen again and be caught unawares. I told them, I was just saying a couple of minutes ago, that I had a running joke in the office with my boss, where every day we would come into the office and be like, so, how much did you lose from your 401k today? He's like, man, I lost 10,000. I was like, I lost 20,000. Wow, you beat me today, man. Tomorrow, how much did you lose from your 401k? It was ridiculous. I mean, and we had to make hard decisions, Do we sell everything? Do we hold? What are we going to do? And you just didn't know what's going to happen with your life. And everything's about to change. Right now, the economy has been recovering. The party has started again. I remember those days when they had the subprime mortgages. Everybody's buying a house. I mean, everybody. People with money, people without money, everybody's buying a house. SUVs were popping. That was the time when Escalade versus Lincoln Navigator, and they were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then Explorer, and then folks like, forget that, Expedition, and it was getting big, it was getting ridiculous, and that was where we were. And when the crash came, they had the crash for clunkers, where they were like, hey, bring back those SUVs, because the gas price is too much, y'all can't survive. And those were like the hardest days ever. And now the party started again. And some of the rules that were created, some of the changes that were made, some of the adjustments people made, and I talked about this was our generation's recession. We weren't around for the Great Depression, so we don't know about those days. So the older people, they can tell you stories. But we are like, we never seen anything like that in our lives. And for them, they were like, well, been there, done that. And we have a chance here to see it a second time in our generation. So we are going to talk about recession. When money failed. Genesis 47:15. Let's read this scripture together after 3 on the screen. 2, 3. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed. So it's amazing. The scripture is such a fascinating book where you can open the Bible and see it touch on a topic that is so direct and so relevant that it blows your mind. This is from the book of Genesis. So you know we're going back. We're going way, way back. And there was the day when the money failed. Amazing. And the Bible talks about that. There was a day when the money failed. You guys ain't the only person who's dealing with that. Let me tell you a story. In Genesis, the money failed. So what is a recession? When somebody uses the word recession, what are they talking about? Let's go ahead and get a definition so that we're all on the same page. What's a recession? So a recession is a significant decline in economic activity that goes on for more than a few months. Earlier, I talked about the fact that that first day when the stock market dropped and things look bad, you're like, well, stuff happens. The second day, you're like, well, hey, 2 bad days, but you know how it goes. It's cyclical. A week, you're like, well, that's a tough week, but it's okay. It's cool. You know, I mean, it's red, but green's coming. A month, you're like, okay, well, 2 months. You're like, ooh, boy, here we go. 3 months. Oh, my God. Something better happen now. A year. Lord Jesus. How much we got saved? That's all really got. And a recession is when the decline goes on for more than a few months. So nobody needs to panic a couple days, a couple weeks, even a month. But once it starts adding up, it hits the definition of a recession. And it's visible in industrial production. So when we talk about manufacturing, we talk about basically the sectors where things are being built. So you go to Fulton Industrial, or you go to like Tony Industrial, and you find those industrial areas where there's a bunch of factories and things like that. They tend to show recession in a very vivid way. Because depending on the industries that they're in, you can see where recession hits the hardest, and it tends to hit industrial production really quickly. And then employment. When there's a recession, jobs become the next hit. One of the things that I realize, and I always tell people about, is the way they run these corporations is very simple. Employees are assets, but they're also the biggest expense. They're the biggest expense. You got to pay people salaries and benefits and all of that stuff. So when it's time to cut, depending on the culture of the company, some companies may be like, all right, let's see what we can do to operate more efficiently. Let's see what we can do to cut excesses. Let's see what we can do. Others are like, well, which salaries can we cut? Because that's an instant saving. Forget you and your family. It's an instant savings. It helps the bottom line. So let's go ahead and clean out whatever we can do. So employment's a good sign. Real income, obviously. The money that people are receiving. I saw folks get pay cuts, which is unprecedented in certain industries. I'd never seen that in my life. I was like, what do you mean a pay cut? I understand a pay freeze, but a pay cut? So what if somebody has fixed expenses? What are you supposed to do? Like, you don't get expense cut to match the pay cut, you know. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you know, the rent is $1,000, the free cash you have after paying bills is $1,050. I'm like, well, we can't pay you. We got to pay $800. What you gonna do? Wholesale retail trade, of course. That's one of the signs of a recession. You see it happening there. So those industries tend to really show us, and of course, employment and income tends to really show us. So the technical indicator now of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, as measured by a country's gross domestic product. So this is the technical indicator. So if you don't understand technical things, what we're saying is the plants start slowing down and letting people go. The amount of trade that's taking place starts slowing down. People's income starts going down. That's what you see. But if you're looking for a technical indicator, you look at the gross domestic product, the overall production of a particular economy, and you see if it's going down for 2 consecutive quarters. So by the time that second quarter comes, they can officially say we are officially in recession. So let's talk about the Great Recession, because that is what we saw, so that we're all on the same page. The Great Recession is a term that represents the sharp decline in economic activity during the late 2000s, which is considered the most significant downturn since the Great Depression. Obviously, it was a play on words. After the Great Depression, there was nothing worse in the economy than the Great Recession. That's how bad it was. You know, and depending on where you were in the economy at a point in time, you felt it differently. Everybody didn't feel it the same way. And then once the recovery began, everybody didn't recover at the same rate. You know what I'm saying? Some people still trying to get out of the Great Recession, and it's been 10 years, and their neighborhood's still struggling to come out. Some businesses still struggling to come out of the Great Recession. Let's watch this video. And we're going to talk about the causes.
From December 2000. To June 2009, the United States suffered an extended economic downturn that came to be known as the Great Recession. It was the worst financial crisis in the U.S. since the Great Depression, leaving an impact on homes and businesses in America and around the world. We'll look at the causes of the recession itself, and its lasting impact. While failures in financial regulation and excessive borrowing by households and Wall Street contributed, the primary cause of the Great Recession was the subprime mortgage crisis. A mortgage is a loan that allows people to buy a house up front. A subprime mortgage is normally issued to borrowers with low credit ratings. And historically, many banks wouldn't even make loans to people with bad credit. In the early 2000s, however, the housing market was booming, so banks began giving subprime mortgages to people even if they had low credit ratings. In other words, lenders, often banks, were loaning money to people who were less likely to be able to pay them back, and charging them more money for those mortgage loans through high interest rates. Now, on the face of it, it doesn't sound like the best deal for the lender or the borrower. But many people took on these subprime mortgages because they stood to make a large profit if their house increased in value. And that seemed like a pretty good bet. Houses had been increasing in value over the past several years. Home ownership had always been central to the American dream, and people who may never have imagined they could own a home saw the possibility in front of them. So, where did things go wrong? In 2007, the housing bubble burst. As demand went down, the prices of homes dropped rapidly. People stopped investing in real estate since it was no longer as profitable. Many people were no longer able to pay off their mortgages or sell their houses, and the banks foreclosed their homes. Since the foreclosed houses were now worth less money, financial institutions lost money too, along with the homeowners. As a result, the housing market failed, banks collapsed, the economy plummeted, and the Great Recession had officially begun. So, what did this mean for the average American? The economic downturn was devastating. Many people and businesses suffered huge financial losses and therefore spent less money, further damaging the economy. Financial firms were not as capable of lending money, and in 2008, the US government finally had to step in and bail out the banks, increasing the national deficit. During the Great Recession, more than 8 million Americans lost their jobs. Nearly 4 million homes were foreclosed each year, and 2.5 million businesses closed. Bank bailouts, federal aid to the auto industry, and government spending programs helped avoid an even bigger crisis. But it may take decades more to fully understand the significance of the Great Recession.
All right. So you got a little glimpse there of some of the causes of the Great Recession, and we're going to take some time to really look back so you can look forward. Learn some things that impacted us during that time. So when we talk about the causes of the Great Recession, how do we know what happened? And this is where that question came. You know, are we just assuming, hey, this is why the Great Recession took place, and we're just kind of coming up with what we feel like is a good explanation, or do we have a substantial factual backing? So as a result of the Great Recession, a commission was created. 10 members, 5 Democratic, 5 Republican. The United States government at that point in time, which would have been under the President Obama, created this commission, and their job was to investigate the causes of the financial crisis and then report back to the president, report back to the administration what happened. Because everybody's scratching their heads. Nothing like that had happened in this country since the Great Depression. And most of us weren't there. So they were like, we need to get to the bottom of this. So we recovered, of course, using a couple of key things that were done to help bring the country out of it. And one was stimulus. There were bailouts that the governments used where they infused cash into the economy in very specific, pointed ways to help stimulate growth. And then there was regulation. The Dodd-Frank Act was created. So I want us to remember these two things so that we could, as we go forward in the conversation, look back so we can look forward. Stimulus, regulation. I want you to say this with me. What's the first one? Stimulus. What's the second one? Regulation. That's how the country responded to the Great Recession. It was a two-step process. Lots of bailouts, and then lots of rules. Because you know, if you know anything about regulation, rules tend to come as a result of something. I'm a structural engineer. A lot of our rules, when there's a new rule that's changed or they change the code, is because something happened. And they were like, all right, from now on, this is what you guys need to do. Same thing. So let's go through the causes. What caused it? Number one on this list we have here is a failure on the part of the government to regulate the financial industry. So the financial industry was going gangbusters. And they were having a good time. As you can tell banks would take your deposits. So you go and you put your money into the bank, and when you would expect the bank to make money from giving out loans, which is kind of standard, but it's old school, banks were investing your money in the stock market and making money from your money. So they were like, well, it's not like you want it, right? We're holding the money. Let's go make money for ourselves. Not for you, because your interest is 0.0001%. But they're going to go make big money, to the point where, like my brother, who started off in Wall Street and went on to work for a software company that provides software for companies to invest. So the companies are supported by sophisticated software that allows them to also invest your money. So that's what banks were doing. And they also, obviously, were providing the subprime loans, and then making complicated packages for how they would pass it on to somebody else. So I would give you a subprime loan, and then we would take a bunch of subprime loans together and package them as a package deal, and then we'll sell it to another investor for a discount, he would think, because you think, well, I'm going to make money off of this, and then he would sell it to somebody else, and the rating agencies who rate credit, and they say if you get a AAA or AAB or whatever it is, they would all rate these packages really well, knowing that these are subprime loans, which is, what's a subprime loan? You can't pay this, but we'll give it to you anyway. Maybe it'll work out. Maybe it won't. Doesn't matter. After I sell it to you, I'm selling the loan to somebody else anyway. It's not like I'm keeping it. I'm not going to be around 30 years with that loan. I'm just going to get it sold and move on. Too many financial firms taking on too much risk. So financial firms weren't just taking your money and then lending money to make their money, which is the way you would expect them to do it, make the interest from the loans. They were taking your money and, having a good time. They were playing financial roulette with your deposits, which is why if the day comes when everybody from a particular bank wake up and say, you know what, I want my money, you can't get it, right? We can't just all show up at the bank and say, I want my money. They don't have the money. Like, what do you mean you want your money? Like, you think it's in a box somewhere? Anytime there's a run on the banks have to close because they don't have the money. Like, why would they keep your money when they could be making money with it? And we understand a certain percentage, but they were going wild. And the problem was when they started losing money from the investments, that's a problem. If they're making money, it's cool. They have your money, then they make extra. We're not hating. Start losing money, that's a problem. Because then how are you going to sustain your organization? Which is why many of them went bankrupt. And then they were bought by other banks. Or they needed the government to help them because the biggest banks had the same problems and needed the government to help them because, you kind of start running out of options of who can buy who. So the smaller banks could be bought by bigger banks. And then the bigger banks who are going bankrupt needed the government to give them money because there's nobody else to buy them. Excessive borrowing by consumers and corporations. As I said, remember the housing boom. I mean, everybody was buying a house. Everybody. Houses were going up everywhere. I mean, everywhere you go, there was subdivisions expanding and real construction. I mean, house after house after house. And then businesses were getting money. Money was cheap. That was the time. You get a loan, you get a loan. Everybody gets a loan. They were having a good time. And then lawmakers didn't fully understand the collapsing financial system. That was one of the things, and this is what that commission came up with. But they also said, you know what? The lawmakers really didn't understand what was going on enough to be able to do anything about it. Again, as we said, that was our first shot at a recession of that level. After the Great Recession, America never went back to those days. That's why they could always tell stories. Man, remember the Great Depression? Remember the Great Depression? You remember those days? Yeah, now they didn't even talk about that. Now they talk about the Great Recession. Because back then, there was no story like that for us. That was the 1920s. It's been a long time. So a lot of people didn't understand what was going on, and they didn't understand how to create rules, they didn't understand how to handle the decisions, which is why they allow banks to do whatever they wanted. I mean, obviously, nobody cares until somebody gets hurt, right? So let's talk about stimulus. So what stimulus or stimuli really helped pull this country out of the pit Number one, there were emergency loans to banks, the auto industry, etc. And I say etc. because those weren't the only two that got financial help, but those were the ones that were plastered all over the news. When you see Citibank and these big organizations getting money, everybody's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why did they need money? I need money. I got to pay my bills. No. Nobody cares about you. We care about them. And then, I need money to pay my car payment. Forget you. The car company. We need to give them money to make sure that they stay in business. So they bail out the car companies. They bail out the banks by giving them, they basically loaned them money. So it wasn't like they gave them the money. It was a loan. It was just a big loan. And then there was something called quantitative easing. Anybody knows what quantitative easing is? They basically, that's when the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates. I know you heard about that. When they were saying, we got to lower the interest rates, to try to make it easier to borrow money so that you can stimulate the economy to keep going. So you're talking about, which is why there was a ripple effect. When the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates, it lowers the rate that businesses can borrow money, and then it lowers the rate at which you can borrow money, which is why the days came when you could refinance your house, because all of a sudden, what used to be 5% and 6% became 3%. At the lowest, it was getting down to 2%, and they were giving you stuff. It was ridiculous. I mean, but the problem was it was happening at a time when people didn't have any money to do anything about it. So we're like, these rates were low, and then people didn't realize, when to call the bottom. So if it keeps going down, you keep kind of waiting. And it kept going down, and then it started going back up, and then you kind of realize, okay, cool, it looks like we're recovering. Let me go ahead and refinance right quick before these rates go too high. But remember those days. And that started off with the Federal Reserve lowering rates, and then there was a ripple effect. Let's talk about regulation. And this one's very, 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 somebody say very, very, very important. Very important. Three varies. Because one of the reasons why we made it out and we stayed out was there were rules. Again, I said I'm an engineer. When stuff happens, they add more rules. After the earthquake took place in San Francisco, San Fernando's in Trinidad. San Francisco, you know what they did? They made the decision that from now on, we're going to change how we view seismic in our designs. In the same way, after the Great Recession, President Obama called folks together, and Dodd and Frank were the ones to come up with the proposed legislation, and they were like, we got to make some rules here, because you all just can't be doing whatever, because we can't go back here. Everybody understands? So let's talk about what specifically it is, and I'll tell you why this is important, because a lot of us don't really understand the details of what's going on when we watch the news. And because we don't understand, we don't have the capability to create an honest position on the issues. We just kind of have to be emotional, which is like, I just don't like that guy. Hence, whatever he said is wrong. Or, I really like him. Whatever he says is right. I'm a Republican. If a Republican president says, let's get rid of that, yeah, he's right. Or I'm a Democrat. And if a Democrat leader says, that's a good idea, it's a good idea. And we just kind of wing it because we don't really understand the details. I'm going to give you a high-level view of Dodd-Frank. It's a monstrosity, but we're just going to give you some high-level things. All right? Number one, number one rule was that banks are required to come up with plans for a quick shutdown if they approach bankruptcy or run out of money. In other words, if you're a bank, you need to be monitoring if your money's running low. And you need a plan for what you're going to do to shut this situation down as you see the cliff coming. You can't jump over the cliff. Because what we couldn't have was what happened with Lehman Brothers, where the money kept going and the day came where, oops, and all of a sudden, boxes and thousands of qualified people got to go home and be like, what am I going to do when the mortgage is due at the end of the month? This is what I'm saying. I got all the degrees. Question?
Just thinking about it. Since the banks were given a loan from the government, is that because so much of our money is FDIC insured, so they have to make sure that people are repaid, or not repaid, but they have that money in case people decide to come in and draw.
That would mean that they care about individual people, which I don't want to say they don't, because they are individuals also. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, not as much. Here's the deal. When Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and some of those big corporations collapsed, it brought the whole economy down. So as a result, they realized we can't just let businesses fail that's of that size. The whole concept of too big to fail. If we let them fail, they're not just going to fail in isolation. They're going to bring down the economy. Hence, it's on us to make sure they don't fail, because they let Lehman Brothers fail, and they let one of the other investment banks fail. They let them fail. They watched them going down, and some of the companies that were going down, they actually asked for help, and they were like, "Nope, we're not helping you." And when they went down, they pulled the economy with them. So that's the whole too big to fail thing, where you can't just. I mean, they even said that with like the Trump organization, where they said if we let him go bankrupt and let him fail, there's a ripple effect. When you lose billions like that, that's going to affect everybody else. So they were like, we're better off shoring it up because it's too big to fail. And that's the whole concept. So yes, I'm sure somebody was thinking about individuals, you know, so that people will be able to get money when they go in and get there. I'm sure they did. I'm not going to say they didn't care. But they had a bigger reason for that decision. And that's the whole too big to fail. It's rare you're going to hear somebody say, well, it's because we care about individual depositors. Yes and no. You know what I'm saying? We just got to be honest. They cared about this economy will go down if that business goes down. Not just the jobs being lost. They'll think about the ripple effect. And that's why, even though people were mad, like, why are you bailing them out? Why are you giving them loans? You know, I need to pay my bills. I got to bail out the car company. I got to pay my car bill. Give me something. You know what I'm saying? Yes, but if we let that industry fall, the impact it has on everybody else is too big to risk. And so that's the big picture. And that's what they have to think about, because they're running the entire country. So they can't just think about, well, individual people, you know, until, of course, it's election time. But that's not what we're talking about today. That's not what we're talking about today, ladies and gentlemen. That is not the topic. That is not the topic. It's not an election season, is it? Yeah. That's not the topic. Financial institutions must increase the amount of money they hold in reserve to account for potential future slumps. That's the answer to your question. That was the second rule from Dodd-Frank, where financial institutions have to hold a certain amount of money in reserve. They cannot leverage all of it or most of it and play dangerously with not having enough money, because if something crashes, people need to know their money there. You see what I'm saying? So that answers your question. The second part or second point is that, yes, that's why they had that. And, you know, smaller banks may have found that to be a little stressful, where, hey, we got to keep all our money. Because it also means you can't lend out all the money either. You have to keep a certain amount, which means, you know, it's costing them to keep money that they can't do something with. Because that's the point of the banking institution. That's how they make their money. They have to use your money to do something with it. You know, give a loan, invest, do something so that they can give you your 0.001% interest. Which is why a lot of those free accounts disappeared. I was like, well, look, since we can't make money with your money, you got to pay us to keep your money. You know? Because, I mean, they disappeared. Like, I mean, you got to go hunting to find a bank that can give you a free checking account. Like, man, anybody got a free checking account out there? You know what I'm saying? Because now they're like, yeah, we'll give you a free checking account if you, there's a if you. You know what I'm saying? If you have a certain amount of deposit, if you swipe that card, you better use it. If you direct deposit, if you keep a certain amount in there so we can use it to make, hey, stop. That was what it was. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the compensation. It's like, hey, well, since we've been forced then you got to pay us to keep that account. You know what I'm saying? Number 3, every bank with more than 50 billion of assets must take an annual stress test given by the Federal Reserve, which can help determine if the institution could survive a financial crisis. Every bank. Which means all those big banks, the government was not going to sit on the sideline and let them fall apart in the next crisis. They were like, if you're going to fall apart, we're going to know. So they basically force each of these banks to have a stress test where they see where that bank is and basically determine if this bank will survive the next recession. Again, some of those banks, when they failed, they didn't just carry America down, they carried the world down, which is nuts. When you think, man, one company can do that? Yup, it's big enough because the financial system is so intertwined. Nothing's isolated anymore, not just within the country, but globally. Which is their money's here, their money's over here, they got money in Africa, it's connected to stuff in South America, it's connected in China. Nobody's isolated, which is why you can't go to war per se, business-wise, or, that's why the trade war is so complicated, because, really, who you're fighting? You know what I'm saying? It's like, yes, I'm going against this company from that country, but their manufacturing plant is up the street here. You know what I'm saying? So if they close down, the guys up the street going to lose their job. Not them, even though they're way over in whatever country. Or I go to war with people in China, but hey, they're the ones manufacturing the stuff for your company here. That if they end up in a situation, you're going to be affected. It's just the economies are so intertwined now that you just can't let a bank fail. You know what I'm saying? Like, well, that's good for you. You all should have managed your money. Whatever. Whatever, Citibank, that's your problem. Those big fat cats sitting up there in their jets thinking no. Let that company fall and see what's going to happen to your job. It affects everybody. And 50 billion is not a lot of money. Like a lot of those companies have so much more than that, which means, and they use that as a cutoff. You got to be able to pass the stress test because we cannot risk your bank falling apart. Everybody understands that? Yeah. Then they created something called the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which identifies risks that affect the financial industry and keep large banks in check. Like when President Obama and his boys came in, they were like, y'all think it's a game. These rules they weren't playing with these rules. They were like, we got a FSOC, they are going to identify the risks. And they're going to keep an eye on the big banks. Make sure whatever y'all did in 2007, 2008, not going to happen again. Everybody understands that? We said two things brought us out. One was stimulus, and what's the second one? Regulations. I tell you, if something happens, there's always a rule. I work in water. After the lead thing in Flint, lead rule. Why? That's how it works. Something happens, there's a rule. Everybody gets that? So by the time you walk out of here, you're going to feel like a financial expert. Then, and I want you to remember this name, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Anybody ever heard of that before? That has been on the news. But I'll keep talking. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau protects consumers from the corrupt business practices of banks. This agency works with bank regulators to stop risky lending and other practices that could hurt American consumers. It also oversees credit and debit agencies, as well as certain payday and consumer loans. So they initiated an entirely new agency per se. Hired staff, give them a charter, put them to work. And their job was to protect consumers. Banks were ripping people off, stop that. Payday loan, people were ripping people off, stop it. Consumer loans, all these things that fed into the recession, they created a group that's their job. Now I'll tell you why I want you not to forget Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. When this new administration came in, That was one of the agencies that had the bullseye on it. They got rid of the leader and put somebody over it who all those years was saying they don't like this agency. It's too much regulation. It's too much oversight. And they switched the person in charge and put somebody who doesn't believe that this needs to operate the way it needs to. It's not a recession. Why you got to do all of that? You don't need all that. I'm just telling you. That's a clue. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's happening now. Everybody understands what happened? So this is important. Somebody say this is important. Because as like you asked, you're like, yeah, so were they doing that because they cared about people? I don't know. I'm not saying they didn't. You know, we're in a church. I'm not saying they didn't. Maybe they are great people. But let's not be too naive. Hence, a bureau was created to keep an eye on the banks.
So you're saying that the person in charge now of this bureau is treating it like it's not a recession?
Well, the point is this. It's not a recession. Now the economy has recovered. So as a result, yes, it's reasonable to say, well, do we really need all of these regulations? They were really in response to something that happened. And as the new administration has come in, they have been like, well, you know, there's too much regulation. And some of these agencies, they're really stifling business because they have all these cases before them and they're really going after the businesses on behalf of the consumer, giving the little man too much power per se. They didn't say that part. But essentially, stifling business growth by letting individuals have an opportunity to complain to a very powerful agency that's not elected, but has the power to go after somebody. And they were like, and they're not Congress. So like, well, I don't know if we want to put all this power in this agency, etc. Whatever the explanation is, obviously we know there's always business people in the back that's lobbying to get rid of any agency that's checking them. There's lobbying groups, there's powerful people who are saying this is a problem. And obviously you have a business-friendly environment, quote unquote. And I'm giving you names because you're going to see it on the news. And it's been going on. Which specific agencies and organizations are being systematically removed. And of course, justification is, do we really need it? You know, it's for the recession. You know what I'm saying? It's not a recession. So, this stifling business growth. And, you know, too much trivial issues. We've got to go after the big things. Whichever. You understand? And then, number 6. The Office of Credit Ratings ensures that agencies provide reliable credit ratings to those they evaluate. Again, what did we see? During the subprime mortgage time, the ratings agencies were rating packages of subprime mortgages as good, knowing this is not good. People can't pay these bills. Why are you selling it as a good investment so that you can get it off your hands so somebody else can buy it? And the rating agencies basically had the freedom within themselves to make decisions that people trusted. There was no oversight. People trusted them because they were the oversight. But they're private organizations. They're not like government agencies. And they rate people and they rate people's credit worthiness and stuff based on their own way of doing it. And some of them had friends and made deals and made arrangements and whatever else was going on. So then the government was like, here's what we're going to do. You're doing the rating. We are going to create an office of credit ratings to oversee the ratings so that you can't just be saying arbitrary things and lead us back down the road that we were on before. And remember, every name you see here, there's a reason why this was created. Obviously, it looks burdensome. I mean, look at how many agencies were added. Look at how much regulations was added. But the recession was the worst thing we'd seen in our generation. And it warranted a very strong response. You know, it's just that, you know, you got to watch the news. Number 7, a whistleblowing provision in the law encourages any woman information about violations to report to the government for a financial reward. We will pay you to tell us if something ain't right. We are making it official that we will cut you a check if you come and say, hey, look, this is what's going on over in this company. I'm the secretary, and every Friday, you will not believe some of the deals that they're making. And you know, the CEO, he's lying. This is what he's really saying. But this was happening. Look, let me just pass this under the table. Just check out those files. Mail my check, okay? They open the door for people to be transparent. Which all of a sudden, because you know, if you know that there's something like this going on, a whistleblowing provision, you know if you're not keeping an eye on how you're running your company, anybody in there could turn on you on any given day. Because you give people money, people start cooperating. You know what I'm saying? You want to do it for free? I don't know if I want to risk my job. But I'm like, how much you make? Cool, I'm going to give you double that. Tell me what's going on. You know what I'm saying? History.com. Ain't nothing like a little history to tell you what's going on. So here's a quick fact. Quick fact. According to some economists, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which was the Depression-era regulation, in the 1990s helped cause the recession. So after the Depression, they created the Glass-Steagall Act, and then they repealed it in the 90s. And some economists believe that contributed to the recession. It allowed some of the US's larger banks to merge and form bigger institutions. Like you know some of these banks are monsters now. You talk about Citibank and some of those banks. That's not a bank, that's a collection of banks. Those organizations are monstrosities. Had the Glass-Steagall Act still been in force, they would not have been able to do that. And they were just buying and buying and buying and growing and growing and growing and just turning into monsters. Which means if they fail, they don't just bring down the US with them. They can bring the whole world down. They're just so big. Hence, they can't fail. Hence, the government will always have to bail them out. Which means you're guaranteed to not have to fail. You see what I'm saying? Yep, that's the point. They don't have to fail. Now, I'm going to read you something from the New York Times, January 30th, 2017. Okay, I'm going to read this to you. Dodd-Frank is a disaster, the president said during a 10-minute session with reporters as he signed an executive order slashing government regulations. We're going to do a big number on Dodd-Frank, Mr. Trump said. The American dream is back. Now, for some people, well, you know how that goes. You know, it's funny. For others who understand what Dodd-Frank is and the value of it and all of the agencies it created and the rules, you start thinking, oh my goodness, what could happen in our lifetime? Like, who sees 2 recessions in their lifetime? 1920s, they saw the Great Depression. A few of them were around to see the Great Recession. But we don't expect it to go back there in our generation. We saw it. It's once in a lifetime. They repealed Glass-Steagall in the 1990s. And economists were like, here we go. 2 decades later, you go all the way back. Let's try this again. Dodd-Frank. You're coming out of it 10 years. Parties started, everybody living a good life. You know what I'm saying? People buying houses again. People taking loans bigger than they can pay again. Life is nice. And what do? So I want you to pay attention. Don't just watch the news and be emotional. Listen to facts. Listen to key things. Listen to specific announcements. When you look at financial news, when you look at the announcements that are being made, listen to what they're saying, listen to the details, because every decision that's made